Setting up my live on my YouTube, so just bear with me. For those on TikTok, but good morning, Sunny Bunani, Sunny Bunani, Sunny Bunani. Hope you guys have enjoyed your weekend and are ready for a fresh day, a fresh week in these Etequini streets. And if those are back home that are watching in South Africa, shout out to you. No, I mean back home in America. I'm sorry, I'm still just waking up, so y'all may have just have to bear with me. But yeah, just good morning, good morning. I'm going to pull up what we're going to be reading today. We have a new article that we're going to be embarking on, and this one is a little bit of a different tone than the last one we was reading. But nonetheless, this is our process of Afrolit 101, and happy to have you guys here. Um, so this weekend we are basically going on the process of going back into kind of a historic aspect of what Afrolit is all about, and this is kind of going to tap into like the title of this live is the steps to start a renaissance. And this is something that I'm interested in terms of my literary, practice as a novel writer. I'm also a musician. I'm actually going to be in the Music and Bizo that's coming up in South Africa, in Durban actually, and I'm excited for that because I'm getting able to resurge my music career in a sense. But in the midst of that, like I have been doing some history on just the contributions that South Africa has had to literature and how that has traveled from America, because they also have a renaissance of Harlem Renaissance, and like these things are kind of tied together. And I was actually able to do some history and learn some stuff about this because I've been working with a museum out here that basically like it's a heritage museum that basically like tries to preserve Zulu, you know, writings. And in this aspect, I've been able to learn a lot just about, the different writers of South Africa and the different like schools of writers. And it was primarily like one writer that it was focused on. It was Mazisi Kunene, who was like the first poet laureate of South Africa. And he was basically like in exile for a while during the apartheid era. And he was teaching at UCLA in California, and his family had to be exiled to California. But when they returned, um, they kind of established a life here in Morningside and in Durban, and they have a museum for him. And I was able to be like really familiar with the family. Like I know his wife, his widow, and his daughter, Mazisi Kunene, and I was really just focused on his legacy for a little bit. But then I got into the aspect of learning that was a whole school of contributors to this renaissance that was happening, and it just something that I was able to write an article about. So usually when I write my articles, it's based upon like a really uh collective of the feedback that I would get from my audience and my engagement with the audience, because that's the purpose of this, is like to reverse engineer articles and trying to show how it's backed in research, and that I'm able to be a voice for people that comment on my TikTok, on my Instagram, on my Facebook. But in this one, it was more backed by the research I was able to do like in literature. So it's going to be a little bit different, but still same process of doing research, being able to analyze the data, and then from there being able to deliver some level of outcome that is backed by research and not just my own perspective. So we're just going to get started this morning. Every article that I write, it starts with a poem. And if you want to read the poem or read the article, it's on Substack at Mr. Responsible. I need to just be putting the link. Let me see if I could put the link in the TikTok chat so that you guys can read along. Shout out to Flower Girl. Appreciate you joining in this morning. Hope you're doing well. Uh, let me see. Let me get you this chat link. Uh, see, I'm still new to this TikTok. I gotta figure out how to put the chat up. I don't know. Can I put in the chat? Where's the chat? I'm not sure where the chat is. But anyway, I want to give you guys the link, but if you would like to basically like link on the to look at the article instead of reading it here, you can either go to YouTube or you can just be able to tag along here while I read aloud. So the poem is going to start now. So the steps to start a renaissance. Uh Cooling embers left behind from the phoenix of 20th century resistance movements cast clouds of haze that contains the remains of what was sacrificed and is becoming. So I'm gonna break this down so that you guys can kind of understand what's going on. So I say cooling embers left behind from the phoenix. The phoenix is basically like something that, begins at one thing and then it like burns, and as that thing burns, it kind of is destroyed, but there's remnants of it. Like in this destruction of this, basically like it's a bird that represents, but it's basically like three phases to this bird. It's the, the actual bird that you may see, then it burns, and then it becomes something new. And that's what it's called, like the phoenix rising. And it goes through this burning process, which kind of destroys it, but it emerges as something like transformed into a new form. So I'm saying that cooling embers left behind from the phoenix of 20th century resistance movements cast clouds of haze that contains the remains of what was sacrificed and is becoming. So in the midst of the 20th century, there was a lot more resistance movements to basically like apartheid in South Africa, or the civil rights movement in America. They kind of left some remnants that we can still tap into, and that's kind of like what I'm saying. The cooling embers. I know I'm not supposed to explain poetry, by the way, but I feel the need to because it's maybe a little bit dense in this morning, but. Let me just read the whole thing and then we'll go through the process of explaining just the whole piece. So, cooling embers left behind from the phoenix of 20th century resistance movements cast clouds of haze that contain the remains of what was sacrificed in its becoming. The evaporating essence is the evidence that validates the Renaissance's templates framework for modern cultural transformations. Our proximity in time to that era of evolution allows us even now to catch the wind of its resonating fumes, guiding us back to the source of the nearly exhausted flames. As we peruse through the incinerated debris, we are called to trace this constellation of erupting uprisings along the trailblazed paths traveled thus far. So, we are basically like just explaining here in Afro Lit 101, what you do on a daily is basically like there is a level of history that we can tap into when we want to create something new for the modern Renaissance that we would like to start. Like I know that there is a lot of creatives in South Africa, in particular, where I've been living for 4 years. Engislala, Etequine, Manje, Amayakanane, Ingepume Peshe, Dolobine. I'm originally from New Orleans. It's a small city in America, but yeah, since I've been here, I've been able to just tap in with the artistry of the world of South Africa. And basically, like I was saying, I've been working with a museum that kind of prioritizes that aspect and working with young creatives. So that's something that I like to like really involve myself in. And in the midst of that, I can see that there's a lot of creativity, and it just I guess the industry is what it's kind of like more suppression to it's like the people are more encouraged to go in the lanes of maybe agriculture or education or lawyer, engineer, doctor. But even when you go into those paths, there's still like a level of unemployment that takes place. But now that we have like this technology, there's like a resurgence of possibly a creative post that people can tap into, and it's something that I'm very interested in being a major part of here in South Africa. It's basically like guiding that creativity so that it can be backed by research. But in the mass of me doing my own research, I've been able to see that these movements that have happened before are very, powerful in terms of South Africa's contribution to, the world and in terms of their artistry. So before I can go and basically like try to act like I'm starting something new in terms of like starting a renaissance, it would be best to kind of go into the history, and that's kind of like what we're going to explore in this article. And yeah, basically like that's what that poem was representing, that this is a process that isn't beginning with us. It's something that has been carried on from the legacies before in the 20th century. So continuing forward, without this investigative curiosity, we risk mistaking distant wildfires of expression as unrelated when they are distinctly sparked by reciprocal invigoration, spreading the enlightenment extracted from their principal relationship. So this is like going into the aspect that, this investigative curiosity we need to be able to understand that if you see renaissances that was happening in the 20th century that you may think was separate, they're actually sparking each other. Like there was a reciprocal invigoration from what was happening in America in the Harlem Renaissance and how that influenced some of those in South Africa to be able to start their own literary renaissance in response to, being suppressed and their voice being suppressed. Both was an aspect of, suppression and then responding to that, and that's kind of like what emerged such powerful, I guess, literary cultures. I want y'all to see this monkey outside that's invading my property. Look at this. Look at this. Look at his mouth. Yeah, you want to run away now? Sorry, y'all. I wish I could show y'all the monkey that was trying to come into my house, but he know better. He know not to play with me. Uh, sorry about that. But I'm back. Uh, what was I saying? Yes. Um, So yeah, there's a basically an exchange between South Africa and America in particular, and there's other areas that was involved in this spreading of a Renaissance throughout the 20th century. But there is something that people may look at it as separate if you aren't in tune to that, going to the history to see the reciprocal invigoration that was taking place. What mainly threads these efforts together is the persistent dilemma of honorable adaptation. When faced with the challenge of denouncing practice customs in order to participate in a systemic idea of the future, various unprecedented trajectories became foreseeable. So we're just talking about how in the midst of what was causing this renaissance to happen is that there was an adaptation that had to take place from the people that were basically like intruded upon in terms of or just suppressed in terms of apartheid, in terms of what was happening in America, just people being three-fifths of a human, not able to have their rights, and they are fighting for their rights on both ends of the angle, and like to be able to voice your opinion. um you kind of had to kind of like find a way to participate in what was now, the version of the future that was more systemic and put in place on top of what you was already doing. But in order to contribute to that, you kind of had to, be a part of the basically like contribution to what is the trajectory going to be, because it's no telling. Like now that you're fighting for a result, you don't know if you're going to win this fight against apartheid, against the rights in America. But you have to like contribute to be able to see that the trajectory isn't something that's just going to be placed upon you, that you can kind of control your narrative. And this is something that it challenges you to basically like denounce some of your practice customs and start to participate in this idea of the future, reluctantly, if you would like to or not. Exposure to shared struggles and neighboring approaches to navigating these adjustments remains to this day the guiding catalyst for explorations in new directions. So if you guys are joined in right now, this is basically like the steps to start a renaissance, and we're just basically talking about how I'm sorry, I'm just going to take a little sip of my tea. Where am I at? I know it's an early morning for a lot of people, so just mind me, I may be a little bit slow. I have further classes that kind of go deeper into the breakdown in the afternoon or the evening time in South Africa, 8:30 to 10:30. But yes, just bear with me. Um, and if you would like to just, share this to those that may be interested in more of the literature side of things and just intelligence in the morning. I know it's just to start your morning off on a different type of path than what you may normally be accustomed to. And I'm just here to, chat with you guys. If y'all have any questions, just place them in the chat. I would love to just, discuss anything that y'all have going on. Yes. So, um, awareness of the specific conflict of consciousness was raised in the souls of Black folks, where W.B. Du Bois documented the crossroads experienced by the African American freedmen as they passed the horizon of post-transatlantic slavery. So we're starting this off with talking about, one of the contributors to the, you know, African American literature, what is the word? Literature, sorry. And we start off with The Souls of Black Folks by W.B. Du Bois, which documented the crossroads experienced by the African American freedmen as they passed the horizon of post-transatlantic slavery. Triumphant accumulation of wisdom from the incremental assimilation into citizenship led to the convergence of many questions concerning the promised opportunity. So as we are assimilating into basically like American culture after slavery in terms of African Americans, I'm from America. I've been living in South Africa for 4 years, but I've lived primarily of my life in the U.S. And, I kind of understand that we were taught some level of identity that was based upon, post transatlantic slavery, that, that is our beginning, our origins. And in the midst of that, we are all in a place where we are now transitioning into basically like assimilating into the American culture. And some of our authors from this time period of the 20th century was questioning this reality and questioning if this was something that they, actually wanted to be involved in. And in the midst of that, they would write something about the souls of Black folks, where they was talking about the conflict of consciousness that would take place in people that have to assimilate into maybe a apartheid state or into post-transatlantic slavery or to American civilization. Like there is something that you have to deal with in terms of the double mind that you may have in terms of wanting to assimilate, but also wanting to keep your culture. And this kind of puts you in a position to where you have to kind of just gain some level of wisdom from this incremental assimilation into the citizenship that led to, questioning a lot of the things that's going on. More than the risk involved in trusting that one could exercise their agency without consequence, the judgments and decisions made with this most essential free will were suddenly calculated through an analytical perspective of graded progression. And as African Americans are basically like attuning to being able to assimilate into the culture, um, first of all, like this idea that you can now express yourself is something that you may be questioning, and it may be like understanding that you were having consequences for this type of action previously. So you also have that aspect of, okay, you may be afraid to actually speak your mind. Like I remember just how people would kind of act when they have more people that was more of that oppressive class around. They would like not be as vocal as they would when they were amongst themselves. And this is something that is a part of that expression, is part of that, ingrainment on your mind when you're in this state and now you're breaking out of it, but you still have these questions of if things are actually, changing. So the judgments and decisions made with the most essential free will were suddenly calculated through an analytical perspective of greater progression. So now there's a harsh, basically like, I guess, some level of harsh criticism on what you are actually contributing, because it's based upon your Western canonization. It's not like you can actually just express yourself in your native tongue. You have to kind of express in a way that is acceptable by the place that you're now currently, residing in, and that it brings some level of just basically assimilation and being able to not be able to fully exercise your speak without understanding that your judgments are taking place and your criticism is taking place, that is making you feel like you're being graded with every type of level that you're making while you're trying to learn. You can't really progress further when everything that you're doing is being graded for your first try. And that's something that I see a lot of people going through right now. Like, even there's a lot of like right now, I was mentioning about the let me just I was mentioning about the Music and Bezo Festival, or the Music and Bezo that's going to be happening in South Africa. And I know that they've been going at it for a while. And, I understand that it's something that is continuing to grow. So, like, for me as an American, like, there are festivals in America, like there's film festivals that I've been to, and I'm not going to grade it on the same level because there's a lot more resources that go into that, and that you have to give some level of grace in terms of somebody that's trying to put an effort onto something and really just embracing the structure that they can put forward with the resources that they have versus trying to compare it to what you would currently are experiencing. And that's something that I'm talking about here. It says more than the risk involved in trusting that one can exercise their agency without consequence. The judgments and decisions made with this most essential free will were suddenly calculated through an analytical perspective of greater progression. And currently there's an economic renaissance that's taking place in America. And it's the same type of thing that I'm talking about here. Like, anytime that there's some level of effort, like there's the Earn Your Leisure that I've been following for a while, and they kind of have some contribution in terms of creating a festival. And in that festival creation, like, a lot of people are, enjoying it, which is, probably primarily, people that are interested in this type of stuff and looking at the networking opportunities and actually are experiencing some of the access that they may be having and having a world where they can basically be with other like-minded people. But there's a lot of criticism as well, and it's grading the situation as if, it has to be, I don't know. I don't know what people are expecting. Like, they're saying that they may be under delivering what they're promising. And I don't know if that's the case, because it seems like they are actually putting the effort towards bringing something that hasn't been around for African Americans in terms of their economic renaissance. So this is something that is kind of similar to what is happening in this literary situation when in the earlier 20th century, when you are basically like trying to put your voice out there after maybe apartheid, or after, some of the transatlantic slave trade, recovering from the transatlantic slave trade, and immediately you are graded by your progression of how much you are, Americanized, and like you can't even build your own organic development. You have to be, put on this spectrum of transformation that is accepted from the place that you're currently in. Let me put my thing on the charger here before it dies. So, although this self-determination could be considered empowering, measuring advancement by the standards set in Darwinian influence environments. Sorry. Although this self-determination could be considered empowering, measuring advancement by the standards set in Darwinian influence environments, which primarily encourage secular behavior, can easily misdirect individuals toward nominal community contribution and maximal self-aggrandizement. So in the midst of trying to assimilate, like, people can kind of just go for themselves, because that's what the industry kind of rewards. And that is something that, it takes you away from how you were probably moving before with more of a communal contribution. And now your progression is being graded on how much you could basically like self-aggrandize and talk about yourself, and more so going more of a secular behavior that is influenced by the Darwinian environment that you may be in now. It's like survival of the fittest. And this is something that is also empowering you in terms of being able to self-determine your future, but in the midst of that, it's like it's also being very like self, I guess, like you're really concerned about only yourself versus the communal community contribution that you may have been before you was given access to basically like a contribute to the culture of a whole of America or South Africa. Before, you was more so interested in what you was contributing in terms of your own community, but now that you're a part of a bigger picture, you can be, you know, basically a participant, but you can also, it can also like be something that is holding you back in terms of your community contribution. Defining an identity that cognitively eluded manipulation while exhibiting an honest observation of the orchestrated disorder became a responsibility shouldered once the intellectual front was unabashedly provoked. So now, this aspect of these creatives or these people that are trying to document their understanding, they have to basically like define their identity by eluding the manipulation of, you know, being able to only talk about something that is accepted by the mass that you're now being able to contribute to. Like, you still want to define your own identity in the midst of being a part of the mass, you know, literary movement that was happening in America as a whole, South Africa as a whole. Now that Black people are actually, you know, participating in it, you kind of have to elude the manipulation and still exhibit an honest observation of the orchestrated disorder, and that is a responsibility that these creators kind of, you know, shoulder going forward, you know, especially as an intellectual front that is basically like guiding those that are coming behind them in terms of people that may have more access to information. Like, your responsibility is to basically give some level of enlightenment, but at the same time you have to kind of have some dignity and some basically you know, just integrity in the midst of that. And that's kind of like a part of what my character in this matrix is Mr. Responsible. It's more of like somebody that is trying to put a level of responsibility in my contribution. So I don't want to just like be self-aggrandizing and only talking about myself. I kind of like use these tools of basically like literature research to be able to tap in with my audience and be able to turn their feedback into something that could be contributed back to the community, and basically like try to do some more of a community building than just trying to usurp energy for my own reason and my own purposes. And that is something, that a responsibility that I've learned from, going to the past and seeing how other people was moving with this type of responsibility that they shoulder, because I'm not the first person to kind of be more of an intellectual and wanting to like bring some level of that to the creative space. And I really like the metaphor that my wife said yesterday. She was talking about, she watches Project Runway, which is basically like a show where they exhibit clothing and they have a competition of these young designers. And she was basically like saying, like, some of these pieces that are heavily designed, they aren't for everybody. They are for the select few that are interested in maybe going to a runway. And sometimes this heavy or this really skillful creativity, something that is like basically like of the elite level, or maybe a more dense idea and more of an intellectual idea, isn't always for the masses. It's for those that appreciate it, and for those that can actually handle this level of garment in that sense. But in terms of this thing, in level of literature, a level of idea, some people can't process things so fast, and it's something that is timeless when you do it that way. Like, when they have a certain piece, they have like archives of collections in terms of fashion, that you can see that this was a beautiful piece that was worn by so and so, and this and this runway show. And then also with literary works, or even just creative works overall, there's some level of prowess that you can put forth that may not be accepted in the immediate time, but when people look back on it, they'll see that you was contributing some real dense ideas that they can grow into whenever they're ready. Whew. Moving forward, we're only going to do a few of these paragraphs today, and later on this evening we're going to break it down a little bit further. But this is the steps to start a renaissance. So, academic and creative offerings from the newly liberated thinkers compounded into a dense ideological framework containing a spectrum of beliefs. The kaleidoscope of stimulating debates and resolution served as a complex symmetrical structure for those observing in hindsight. Kind of like what I was just talking about. Like, this thing has emerged into basically like a lot of people's different experiences that was happening in terms of these renaissances that was taking place. I'm specifically talking about, post W.B. Du Bois and, Booker T. Washington in America. They was fighting for some level of intellectualism, and then from there they had like the Harlem Renaissance, and in that contribution of the Harlem Renaissance, there was different creative and academic offerings, and these newly liberated thinkers were basically like putting out an ideological framework, like a library and a spectrum of beliefs that people can tap into. And then this becomes like a kaleidoscope of stimulating debates and resolutions. And it serves as a complex symmetrical structure for those observing in hindsight. So when we look back at this, it's something that we can tap into in terms of understanding, all of the different outlooks that was taking place in terms of this new liberation. And that's very powerful for us to kind of guide us further as creatives going forward. Even when natural disagreements transpired, the assortment of styles extending from this healthy dialectic provided a plethora of entry points for future generations to relate. So critics of Du Bois' talented tent concept as a leadership solution, claiming it was elitist and bourgeois, were drawn to align with Booker T. Washington's more populist method of institutionalizing a pragmatic trade-based education as the way forward. So there was two different kind of like movements that was happening, but it's not like, one is bad and the other one is good. It's more of this is creating a healthy dialectic and giving us entry points in the future. If you may align more with the, situation of maybe having a leadership class that is able to guide those, and you may align with the talented, of W.B. Du Bois. But if you are more of the pragmatic side and wanting more of a trade-based education, this is something that Booker T. Washington was trying to put forward. And it's more of a populist method than more of a elite-driven method that they would criticize Du Bois for. So domestically, these conversations around united development crystallized even further, resulting in the production of creative vehicles such as the Harlem Renaissance, which articulated distinct experience through multiple mediums. So as these people were tapping into their new liberation and seeing that they have writers before them, they basically like emerged that into something that was similar in their own form, which was the Harlem Renaissance, and it articulated the distinct experience through multiple mediums such as music. You have the jazz, you have basically like also literary movements, and we'll talk about more of how this stuff kind of continued to build on top of each other as this movement of Harlem kind of influenced some of the Sophiatown Renaissance that was happening in South Africa. So yes, let's progress further. Global attraction to their specific ideological apparatus helped immortalize the cultural mecca of America for further replication. The emergence would be duplicated with distinctions determined by geographical placement and political environment, but the core collective approach remained consistent throughout. In similarly intellectual circles, the spectrum of alternative perspectives work to stabilize the shared consciousness, preventing one-sided schools of thought. South Africa's mid-century Sophiatown Renaissance exemplifies this transnational inspiration and how its contributors were impacted by the earlier generation's method of documentation. So this is the key of what we were trying to talk about, the connection between the Sophiatown Renaissance that happened in South Africa and the Harlem Renaissance, and how what was happening caused a global attraction. And you may see these things as separate if you're not going into the history of it all, which I was able to do, fortunately, and be able to understand how no matter what we may believe in terms of, the Sophiatown Renaissance, I didn't even know that existed for a long time until like earlier this year. And this is my history of understanding that I'm going to be contributing to the literary, canon of what is happening in South Africa if I contribute my novels, if I contribute my writing, my articles. And, I also can see that I'm also contributing to the African American literature movement. But this is more of a global trade that's happening on the intellectual front, whether people may be aware of it or not, that there's a history of this intellectual circles that is happening, and it's like just different basically like small waves that are taking place from a greater just intellectual push that is happening on a global scale rather than just in the individual societies that may be contributing to these renaissances. um, and this is what we need in terms of going forward, in terms of if we want to contribute in terms of creatives today. So that is what the idea around the steps to start a renaissance is all about. And we're going to finish off with one last paragraph before we close out for this morning. And then we're going to continue on the next, episodes. So, yes, let me just finish off here. Adding to the canonical critiques that exhibited the struggles of marginalized people worldwide, upheld the continued analysis of what was being faced. Persistent antagonistic circumstances emphasized the relevance of these dialogues, motivating renewed retrieval by more recently confined contesters. The excavation from this particular confinement of the modern souls of Black folk in America layered a language barrier that puzzled foreign counterparts when encountering the English output of colonized voices. So this situation is building like a documentation of the struggles of marginalized people, and that is something that's very powerful when we maybe experience some level of marginalized situations today in terms of maybe being suppressed by the tech opportunities and having some level of unemployment, and get lastly I'm sorry, Ingilashli Msibenziwame, earlier this year. And, as of recent, I've been more tapping into my creativity again. But that is just an aspect of, I wouldn't say that I may be living more of a privileged situation, but I know that that is something, persistent throughout South Africa as a whole. And, in the midst of that, we still need to be able to document, what's going on as a marginalized, people. And to contribute to that in terms of being able to guide, some of the people that may be, have some level of skill but don't necessarily have a place to put it. We do have some opportunities with this world of the tech that is emerging, but in the midst of that you still need some to have some level of systems that in place that are not actually trying to I guess exploit your creativity and more so expropriate your labor. It's more of something that needs to be direct to consumer, or not even direct to consumer, just a feedback community that you are getting value for what you're putting forth. And that is something that I really prioritize in terms of what I'm doing here in reverse engineering African literature, because what it does is allows for others to be able to see how I can use the tools that I've learned in my tech field, in my tech studies of research and design, and being able to apply that method towards creativity. And that's something that I feel like will help strengthen basically like the renaissance that we need going forward in terms of the African diaspora. Sorry. Uh, Some of the impacted explorers associated their own advancement with the ability to comprehend this language, while others insisted on sourcing their encouragement from unfiltered native tongues. So we're talking about the English language and how, as the excavation from this particular confinement of the modern souls of Black folks in America layered a language barrier that puzzled foreign counterparts that was experiencing the same marginalization. They'd encountered the English output of these colonized voices, but in the impact that was happening, um, they were associating their own advancement with the ability to comprehend this language. So some people may from South Africa may be, showing that they may be more advanced because they can understand some of this English output that was taking place in the Harlem Renaissance. And others, insisted on sourcing their encouragement from unfiltered native tongues. So this is something that in the midst of South Africa, like there is a language, situation to where some people would prefer more of a native tongue in terms of how they're putting their artwork out there or their creativity out there. And that's something that Mazisi Kunene, who is the museum, who had a museum that was basically like preserving Zulu heritage. Like he wrote over 10,000 manuscripts in the Zulu language, and it's something that's very valuable in terms of being able to have that documented. And that is something that is necessary in terms of not having the minds of South Africa only being able to get intellectualism from outside sources, because your mind is basically like the language. Like it's the your mind is the language is basically like the land of your mind. It's like where basically like you are going to understand everything. Is going to be like where everything is built on top of. So any ideas and any concepts, the language is going to really help you understand, you know, um, how this thing is going to be framework. And if it's from the English language and you may be speaking more of a Zulu language or Xhosa or Venda, any of these different, languages in South Africa, when you have to now adopt information from English, it kind of puts something on top of something that isn't really placing it in its right context. So it's better for sometimes for South Africans, if you are speaking more of the native language, to be able to have your intellectualism in a language that's not so foreign to you. And that's something that people were fighting for in terms of having this dialectic or this dialogue between some of those that was more so wanting to advance in terms of understanding like the world global language, and others wanting to basically like be consistent in providing intellectualism in their own language. The heightened sensitivity resulting from the repressive interactions forced upon South Africans through British and Afrikaans vernaculars justified the importance of sustaining a more rooted composition of intelligence seeded by the 19th century's heroic praises of Mshwangweni and Mashlangwane. Magawani, sorry to butcher your name, sir. The heroic praises of Mshwangweni and Magawani. Mshwangweni and Magawani. Mshwangweni and Magawani. The heightened sensitivity resulting from the repressive interactions forced upon South Africans through British and Afrikaans vernaculars justified the importance of sustaining a more rooted composition of intelligence seeded by the 19th century heroic praises of Mashangweni and Magawani. So This is kind of what was raised in terms of importance, in terms of those of like the Mazisi Kunenes of the world that helped able to also establish this on a worldwide scale. Because in the midst of South Africa having its issues in terms of apartheid and being able to be forced to kind of adopt the British and Afrikaans vernacular, some people had to kind of sustain the rooted composition of intelligence, which was seeded by these heroic praises, but carried on further by the likes of those in literary movements that were going into exile and actually establishing universities and putting the information that was coming from South Africa in terms of this ancient wisdom into the canonization of Western education. And we're going to talk about further how this helped influence movements in America based upon California's UCLA situation, and how they kind of had African literature studies, and Mazisi Kunene was like one of the contributors to that. And that's something I was able to learn about, and I'm going to be able to contribute further information as we carry on with these classes, the Afro Lit 101. But this has been a morning session with you guys, and I appreciate those tapping in on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and continue to tap in and share this and like and subscribe to the channel as we're going to continue this movement. But that's going to end it for us. If there's any questions for anybody that's tapping in while we are still here, I would appreciate you. But I'm going to sign off on the YouTubular AfroLit 101. Tap in tonight at 8:30 for the full breakdown that we'll be going through.